Hey guys, tonight we're going to slip quietly through the lantern-lit corridors of the Forbidden City and pause before doors that were rarely opened, even for the highest officials. We all know that emperors staged grand ceremonies in public, courtyards towering altars, thundering drums, and endless lines of robed ministers bowing to heaven and earth. But what if I told you that deep inside those same palace walls, hidden away from daylight, there were smaller, more mysterious rites that no one dared record in full? These were not the rituals inscribed in stone, but ceremonies whispered about in chronicles, cloaked in euphemism, and only half remembered in folklore. Do you dare find out how it was done? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from, and what time is it where you are right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The official rites of the Chinese court were dazzling, designed to broadcast legitimacy. The emperor, styled as the Son of Heaven, would march onto immense platforms, robed in sky-colored silk, offering jade, wine, and the blood of animals to affirm his bond with the cosmos. These grand events were scheduled on the calendar, chronicled in court histories, and reported to the provinces. They were meant to be seen. But parallel to this visible liturgy, existed another world veiled in secrecy. Hidden rooms inside the palace became stages for ceremonies that did not appear in official ritual compendiums. Lanterns were dimmed, curtains pulled close, and only a handful of trusted attendants were admitted. Eunuchs, with their sworn loyalty and silence, were often the gatekeepers. A Taoist priest or fangshi might be summoned, bringing with him scrolls of talismans inked in red, bowls for libations, and formulas that promised to bend fate. Why the need for secrecy? Because while state rituals served as a contract between emperor and heaven, these private rites were a kind of insurance policy, performed in moments of doubt. If a comet streaked the sky, or a famine gnawed at the empire's edges, the emperor could not afford to rely only on what was public. The hidden rites offered a channel to powers less acknowledged but still feared. Imagine the atmosphere: the muffled sound of a bronze bell, the heavy scent of pine resin smoke curling through the rafters. The emperor seated in silence, while attendants arranged offerings on a lacquered altar, too small to ever host a grand procession. The court outside remained unaware, their minds fixed on bureaucratic reports and grain tallies, while here, behind a silk screen, a different negotiation with the cosmos was underway. Records hint at these practices, but rarely describe them outright. Court historians, bound to decorum, wrote around the subject, using phrases like a private act of reverence or rites of unusual form. Some texts even leave suspicious blanks where a detail should have been, suggesting deliberate omission. For later readers, those silences became louder than words. It is here, in this gap between what was written and what was performed, that legend thrives. Did the emperor seek to extend his reign beyond the mandate allotted by heaven? Did he wish to summon ancestral spirits for guidance? Or did he fear rebellion so much that he turned to offerings unfit for daylight? The truth remains uncertain, preserved only in fragments. As you drift with me through this dim palace chamber, notice how the secrecy itself becomes part of the ritual. A ceremony hidden is a ceremony magnified in power, at least in the imagination of those who heard about it later. For in a world where visibility equaled legitimacy, invisibility suggested something far more daring. And so we leave the emperor seated in silence, the shadows flickering on carved beams, the first murmured chants rising from the lips of his unseen priest. What exactly did those hidden altars hold, and who tended them so carefully? That we'll uncover next. The palace at night was not as silent as you might think. Behind the vast courtyards that dazzled visitors by day, faint echoes lingered, an occasional clatter of a guard's spear, the scratch of a brush in some clerk's office, or the squeak of wheels as a cart carried supplies across the cobblestones. Yet hidden deeper, away from watchful eyes, there were chambers that seemed to exist in a different rhythm altogether. These were not places where ministers gathered to debate taxes or where scholars copied edicts. They were tucked-away spaces, dimly lit, where incense smoke rose in curls like secret handwriting. Here stood the hidden altars of the court. You and I can imagine one, not grand or towering, but modest in scale, perhaps no larger than a household shrine. A lacquered table draped in yellow silk, jade bowls polished smooth, bronze vessels filled with wine that reflected the flame of a single candle. The walls thick with silence, absorbing every breath. And before this arrangement, an emperor would sit, not as the majestic son of heaven surrounded by throngs, but as a solitary figure confronting forces he dared not name aloud. The hidden altars were never mapped for posterity. No blueprint of the palace reveals them. No tour guide points out their precise location. Instead, they surface in scattered remarks from memoirs, or in the hushed lines of palace gossip preserved through generations. Eunuchs whispered of the Mesith secret service of ritual conducted behind curtained doors, when a storm battered the capital, when plague spread through the alleys, or when an omen darkened the sky. These altars were prepared. The emperor, uneasy with official channels, sought a more intimate bargain with Heavener, with something else entirely. It's hard not to wonder, what gave these altars their power? Perhaps it was precisely their invisibility. A rite unseen felt freer, less bound by regulations. In official ceremonies, every gesture was prescribed, every word pre-written, but at the hidden altar, improvisation might creep in, an added chant, a hastily offered relic, a question asked aloud in the dead of night. For a man who ruled millions, this secrecy may have felt like the only honest moment of his reign. The attendants knew their part well. A Taoist adept, brought in quietly, might paint talismans with cinnabar ink, each stroke carrying the promise of cosmic intervention. Eunuchs arranged sacrificial food fruits, grains, meat cut, in exacting patterns that echoed ancient symbolism. Sometimes the offerings included unusual items, scraps of cloth, locks of hair, miniature figurines. Each was believed to carry a piece of life force, a substitute for something far greater. And here, in the flicker of the lantern light, even the emperor's demeanor changed. The man who by day projected iron confidence might in this chamber murmur a private prayer, his voice just above a whisper. Was he speaking to his ancestors, to heaven, or to powers more ambiguous, beings not recognized by the official pantheon? The sources fall quiet, but the silence itself feels meaningful. We should pause for a moment. If you've ever visited an old temple or church after hours, you know the feeling, walls pressing in, air thick with unseen weight, a hush that makes your skin prickle. Imagine that, multiplied by the knowledge that the most powerful man in the land was willing to step into that same hush, hoping it would bend fate to his will. Doesn't it make you wonder how much of rulership was truly political, and how much depended on faith in the unseen? What lingers most in the record is not detail, but absence. Court historians passed over these ceremonies with euphemisms, sometimes erasing them altogether, but the mere fact that scraps survive tells us they existed. And if they existed once, then they must have existed many times, unrecorded, dissolving like incense smoke into the rafters of history. Picture it now. The emperor rising, his sleeve brushing the air, the eunuchs bowing as the final chants fade, the wine bowls emptied, the talismans burned to ash, the chamber sealed once again as though nothing had happened. By dawn, ministers would arrive with their memorials and petitions, never knowing that just hours earlier, the fate of the realm had been bargained for in candlelight. And this raises a question, doesn't it? Who exactly managed these ceremonies, and how much influence did they wield over an emperor already consumed by doubt? The answer leads us into the lives of the eunuchs and magicians who served as keepers of these secrets. The empire might have been ruled by an emperor, but in the shadows of the palace, it was often eunuchs and magicians who choreographed the mysteries. If the emperor was the figurehead, they were the stagehands of destiny, arranging each detail until the chamber felt like a different world. Eunuchs, after all, were the natural guardians of secrets. They had no families of their own, no heirs to betray confidences to, and their survival depended entirely on their loyalty to the throne. For centuries, outsiders accused them of meddling, of pulling strings behind the curtain. But when it came to the hidden altars, who else could be trusted to prepare the space, to guard the door, to fetch the priest, without a whisper escaping? You can almost picture them gliding silently, their felt shoes making no sound, their sleeves hiding hands that carried censers, scrolls, or bowls of grain. Then there were the fang-sheath magicians, astrologers, and ritual masters. They were not ministers in tall hats quoting Confucius. They belonged to a different tradition, one that blended Taoist mysticism, folk practice, and sometimes even imported law from India or Central Asia. A fangshi might promise to summon the favor of celestial spirits, to cleanse the court of demonic influences, or to prolong the emperor's years. He came armed with talismans, formulas, and chants that no court official would dare recite in daylight. Think of the scene: a eunuch lighting incense, stepping back into the shadows, a fangshi chanting in a voice low and rhythmic, his brush dancing across yellow paper with red ink that seemed to glow in the candlelight. The emperor, silent, watching as if mesmerized. Each man in that room had a role, and each role reinforced the illusion or the reality that the balance of heaven could be swayed. Of course, the relationship between these figures and the emperor was never simple. A ruler might place his faith in them one night and doubt them the next. Ministers often warned against letting magicians near the court, claiming they were charlatans. Yet, when the empire shook, when floods devoured crops or eclipses darkened the sky, those same ministers knew that the emperor would call for them anyway. Because who else dared promise an answer when no earthly policy seemed enough? Eunuchs, too, found power here. Controlling access to the hidden altars meant controlling access to the emperor's deepest anxieties. If a eunuch vouched for a certain priest, that priest's voice might echo directly into the imperial ear. And in a world where whispers could topple ministers, this was no small advantage. You might imagine them gossiping in coded phrases, knowing that an indiscreet word could cost a head. Or picture a eunuch holding the candle just so, making sure the emperor's face was illuminated, while his own remained in shadow. In moments like these, service and manipulation blended seamlessly. But there's something almost theatrical in all of this, isn't there? The palace chamber became a stage, the altar a set piece, the eunuchs and magicians the cast. And like any theatre, its power depended not just on what was shown, but on what was believed. If the emperor felt reassured, then the rite had succeeded, whether or not the stars shifted or the rains came. Yet one cannot ignore the risk. To lean too heavily on such men was to invite scandal. Whispers of sorcery, accusations of corruption, fears that the throne itself was bewitched. These haunted many dynasties. Some emperors suppressed the practices out of caution, while others indulged them with reckless devotion. Which path brought more stability? History leaves the answer open. Still, the image remains. Eunuchs moving silently like shadows, magicians murmuring words that blurred the line between ritual and incantation, and an emperor caught between belief and doubt. And then comes the question that lingers: what exactly did they offer at these altars? If not the prescribed sacrifices of oxen and wine, then what? Were the rumors of darker offerings true? To find out, we must look at the uneasy line between sacrifice and substitution. Sacrifice, just the word itself, can make you pause, can't it? By day, the empire proclaimed offerings of animals, wine, and jade to heaven. These were safe, acceptable, even noble in their symbolism. But at night, within those hidden chambers, whispers suggested something more unsettling. Were human lives ever laid upon those secret altars? In the earliest dynasties, the answer was not hidden at all. Archaeology reveals tombs where servants and guards were buried alive alongside kings, their deaths framed as acts of loyalty. Ancient texts speak openly of rulers who offered human blood to secure the mandate of heaven. Over time, though, such practices grew distasteful, even abhorrent, to Confucian morality. The state officially replaced people with animals, a reform celebrated as proof of civilization's progress. And yet, those rumors persisted. A eunuch claims that a prisoner vanished after a ceremony. A line in a chronicle hints that life itself was given. Later historians, cautious, wrote only in euphemism. Some described red offerings, others silent rites. None dared be more specific. Which makes you wonder, were these accounts censorship, or clues left in plain sight? By the Han Dynasty, a pattern emerged. When human sacrifice was too scandalous, rulers leaned on substitutes: locks of hair, drops of blood, or figurines fashioned of straw or clay. Each stood in for the body itself, believed to trick or appease unseen powers without violating the new moral codes. Imagine a fangshi painting a face onto a doll, then burning it until only ashes remained. The smell of smoke filled the room, but no real blood was spilled, at least not that anyone would admit. Substitution became its own kind of theatre. Ministers could reassure themselves that no lives were taken, while the emperor felt the visceral weight of a ritual that symbolically offered what was once literal. It was a compromise that kept the old logic alive, that the universe demanded something more intimate than grain or wine. But sometimes, symbolism was not enough. Records suggest that in times of crisis, the boundary blurred. What if the drought deepened, the rebellion spread, the comet refused to fade? The temptation to escalate must have been immense. After all, what price was too high to preserve the empire, or the emperor's own reign? And if a prisoner already marked for death was offered instead, Who in the palace would ever confess it? Consider how silence itself became a ritual tool. If no scribe recorded the act, if no witness outside the chamber lived to tell the tale, then the offering dissolved into smoke, both physically and historically. The absence of evidence may not be proof, but it is a gap that hums with possibility. Picture the emperor's face as he watched. Did he feel horror, or only relief? Did he avert his gaze, or stare intently, convinced that this act would bend the heavens back into alignment? The eunuchs and magicians, for their part, must have moved with choreographed precision, erasing all traces before dawn. It leaves us with a haunting question. How many times did such moments occur, hidden within the palace walls, never acknowledged by history? And if sacrifice, whether human or symbolic, was the tool of last resort, what pushed emperors to reach for it? That answer lies in the storms of crisis, when the empire itself seemed to tremble, and cosmic bargains felt like the only path forward. Crisis has a way of stripping away ceremony and revealing desperation. You can almost see it. An emperor pacing the jade floors of his chamber, while ministers kneel outside, waiting to be summoned. The official rites have already been performed on the great altar, oxen sacrificed, jade polished, prayers intoned in full daylight. Yet the drought drags on. The comet still hangs like a fiery scar across the sky, or the rebel army marches ever closer. What then? This is when the hidden altars are prepared once more, when the emperor seeks a bargain not with law or tradition, but with the cosmos itself. Chinese chronicles are filled with crises that rattled even the most confident rulers. In the Han Dynasty, floods of the Yellow River swallowed whole villages, forcing emperors to wonder whether heaven itself was withdrawing its mandate. In the Tang Dynasty, comets appeared so often that officials debated whether they were warnings of rebellion, war, or the collapse of dynastic order. And in the Ming, droughts left fields cracked like pottery, peasants starving in numbers too vast to count. At such times, faith in ordinary politics felt fragile, and superstition, whether admitted or not, crept into the emperor's decisions. Behind the curtains of the hidden altars, the language of these crises changed. Instead of edicts and decrees, there were whispered chants. Instead of military strategies, there were talismans painted in red ink. A fangshi might promise that the right formula could banish the comet, that a blood offering could end the drought, that an ancestor could be coaxed into protecting the throne. Eunuchs, loyal to secrecy, made sure that these promises were carried out in silence. And while it might sound outlandish to us, it's worth pausing here. Imagine the pressure of being told your reign depended not only on armies and taxes, but on cosmic signs light in the sky, cracks in the soil, the pattern of a bird's flight. Wouldn't you try anything to regain control? Wouldn't you, too, search for a lever hidden in the unseen world? Sometimes, these bargains worked, or at least, they seemed to. A comet faded, as all comets eventually do. A long-awaited rain arrived, reviving crops and morale alike. Ministers credited heaven, the people cheered, and the emperor's faith in his hidden rites deepened. Other times, no relief came. And when that happened, the emperor's doubt must have grown heavier than the crown itself. It wasn't only natural disasters. Political crises also drew the emperor to the hidden altars. Rumors of treason, fears of assassination, plots within the palace walls, these could not be resolved with proclamations alone. Here, the emperor might seek oracles, casting lots or burning slips of bamboo, watching how the ashes scattered to reveal whether a minister was trustworthy or a concubine loyal. What we might call paranoia, the ancients would have called vigilance against cosmic imbalance. Think, too, of the symbolism. In times of rebellion, sacrificing a figurine or a prisoner could be framed as a ritual defeat of the rebels themselves. In times of famine, burning grain before an altar could be seen as both offering and plea. Each act folded the empire's crisis into a story where the emperor still held the starring role, even if only in secret. And so, these hidden rites became a kind of emergency theatre, staged only when the ordinary scripts failed. The question is, who recorded them? Or rather, who chose not to? Because while official histories dance around such practices, their very omissions remind us how sensitive they were. To write too much risked scandal. To say nothing risked erasure. The result is that we're left with fragments, teasing us with what might have happened behind those closed doors. As you sit with that thought, imagine one such night, the sky outside dark with dust, the empire's granaries nearly empty, and a chamber glowing with the faintest candlelight. The emperor bows before a hidden altar, knowing that his actions will never be carved into stone, but still hoping they'll echo in the heavens. But if these rites were so secret, why do we know anything at all? The answer lies in the silenced records, the traces left by scribes who dared not speak plainly, but who still left us enough to sense what was missing. Silence can be louder than words. When you flip through the official chronicles of Chinese dynasties, it isn't only the details that matter, it's the gaps. You'll notice entire lines where a ritual is described vaguely, as a private act of reverence, or where a date is given with no explanation of what occurred. These omissions aren't accidents. They are signs that the scribes, whose job was to record everything, were told or compelled not to write certain things down. The responsibility of a court historian was enormous. On the one hand, they were meant to preserve an honest account for future generations. On the other, they lived under the same emperor whose secrets they might expose. To write too bluntly about hidden rites could be seen as betrayal. And betrayal, in the palace, was not a safe career choice. So the solution was silence, euphemism, vague phrasing, or deliberate blanks. Imagine how tense that must have been holding the brush above the page, knowing that too much honesty could cost you your life. Some dynasties even had rules about this. Records of certain ceremonies were marked restricted, locked away in archives that only the emperor or his closest attendants could access. In the Ming dynasty, entire volumes of palace ritual manuals vanished mysteriously, as if swallowed by time. Were they burned to keep secrets safe? Or were they hidden, waiting to be discovered? No one knows for certain. What makes this silence fascinating is that it creates a paradox. The very absence of detail confirms that something happened. After all, why leave a blank if there was nothing to hide? It's a little like hearing a conversation cut off mid-sentence. You may not know what was said, but you know it mattered. Occasionally, whispers slipped through the cracks. A memoir by a retired official might hint that strange lights were seen in the palace that night. A folk tale passed down through generations might describe a eunuch who claimed to have witnessed a shadow standing beside the emperor. None of these are hard evidence, but together they weave an atmosphere of secrecy that feels impossible to ignore. You and I can picture the historians themselves. By day, they sat in neat rows, recording edicts, speeches, and ceremonies. By night, perhaps they muttered to one another, wondering what exactly went on in those sealed chambers. Did they envy the eunuchs who were allowed inside, or did they feel relief at being excluded? Either way, their pens grew cautious when the subject came too close. It's tempting to compare this to modern times, isn't it? Imagine a press conference where the most interesting question is dodged, and the transcript later shows a no comment. The silence becomes the story. In the same way, the chronicles of China's emperors tell us much through what they refuse to say. And so we're left with a historical puzzle. Fragments of description, coded language, suspicious erasures, enough to sense the presence of hidden rites, but not enough to reconstruct them in full, which leaves room for speculation, for legend, for entire schools of folklore to bloom in the shadow of missing words. This makes you wonder, if the records are silent, where else can we look for traces of these secret practices? Perhaps the answer lies outside the chronicles, in the echoes of art, superstition, and folk ritual that carried forward pieces of the palace's hidden life. When official records fall silent, culture often keeps speaking. The palace may have concealed its hidden rites, but traces of them filtered into art, superstition, and everyday practice, leaving us breadcrumbs to follow. Think of them not as direct transcripts, but as echo-soft reflections of what once happened behind those guarded doors. One of the clearest echoes comes from ritual masks. Have you ever seen a Nuo mask, with its exaggerated expressions and wild colors? These masks were used in exorcistic ceremonies, meant to drive away plague and malevolent spirits. Though associated with folk religion, their designs and chants sometimes mirrored practices once performed in the palace itself. It's as if the imperial rites slipped out through the servants' doors and resurfaced in village festivals, transformed but still recognizable. Talismans offer another clue. Bright red strips of paper covered in looping calligraphy, burned to ash, and mixed into water, were thought to cure illness or avert disaster. In the palace, Fangxi drew similar characters on silk or wood, presenting them as tokens of divine authority. Over centuries, these gestures trickled downward, becoming part of household superstition. A farmer hanging a charm above his door might never know that its origins lay in a secret rite once whispered in the Forbidden City. Even the kitchen god, that humble household deity, bears faint fingerprints of palace influence. Families would burn paper effigies of him at year's end, sending his spirit to heaven with a sweet coating of honey on his lips so he'd report kindly on their household. Scholars note how eerily similar this is to the substitution sacrifices once hinted at in palace records. Effigies burned, offerings sweetened, messengers dispatched to heaven in place of flesh and blood. Art, too, carries hints. Some murals in Taoist temples show emperors kneeling before celestial courts, flanked by priests with scrolls and censers. Officially, these paintings celebrated cosmic harmony, but if you look closely, the imagery sometimes veers toward the uncanny dark altars, shadowy attendants, strange flames curling upward. Were the artists drawing inspiration from rumors of what emperors did in secret? We can't be certain, but the resemblance is striking. And then there are the legends. Stories of emperors who bargained with spirits, of eunuchs who vanished after serving at midnight rituals, of hidden rooms sealed behind palace walls. These tales, passed down for centuries, blur history and imagination. Yet they persist, precisely because silence left space for them to grow. When no one wrote down the truth, the people filled in the gaps with stories. It's almost like cultural memory works as a backup system. The official archives may be incomplete, but folk tradition remembered something was there. The fact that villagers still performed rituals echoing palace practices centuries later suggests that knowledge leaked out not through documents, but through habits, symbols, and stories. You might think of it this way. The palace tried to contain its secrets, but culture acted like water, seeping through cracks, carrying fragments downstream. Even today, when we see a mask dance or a red talisman fluttering in the wind, we're catching a faint shimmer of those hidden rites. But of course, echoes are not the same as the thing itself. They hint, they tease, but they do not reveal. To understand what really happened, we have to reimagine one of those forbidden nights, piecing together the fragments into a single, haunting scene. So let's try, just for a moment, to step inside one of those forbidden nights. No more fragments, no more whispers, just a reconstruction from the scraps left behind. Picture yourself walking through the palace at midnight. The great halls are dark, the courtyard silent except for the rustle of silk banners in the night air. A eunuch beckons you forward, his lamp barely glowing, and you follow him into a chamber hidden behind heavy curtains. The room is smaller than you expect. No towering altar, no endless rows of ministers, only a low table draped in yellow silk. On it rests a bronze vessel of wine, jade bowls filled with grain, and a figurine carved of wood, its painted eyes staring blankly. Incense smoke coils upward, clinging to the rafters, until the ceiling itself looks alive with shadows. The emperor sits alone, his dragon robe exchanged for plain silk, his crown absent. For once, he is not a distant god-king, but a man burdened by fear. A Fangshi kneels nearby, chanting under his breath. His brush paints talismanic symbols in cinnabar ink, each line drawn with the careful deliberation of someone who believes every stroke could tip the balance of heaven. The eunuchs move silently, arranging offerings, sprinkling wine onto the floor, their faces blank with practiced obedience. And then, the figurine is lifted. It represents a life. Perhaps a substitute for a condemned prisoner. Perhaps just a symbolic vessel. The magician murmurs. The emperor watches. And the figurine is set aflame. For a moment, the chamber glows with a harsh light, then collapses into darkness as the ashes scatter. The smell of smoke, sharp and acrid, fills the lungs. At that instant, the emperor whispers a prayer too quiet for anyone but the gods to hear. Was it a plea for rain? For victory? For the safety of his dynasty? No record tells us, and perhaps that is the point. The prayer was meant for heaven alone, never for history. The ceremony ends as suddenly as it began. The eunuchs snuff the candles, the Fangshi gathers his brushes, and the emperor rises in silence. By dawn, the court will resume its daily rhythms. Ministers will debate taxes, generals will report on battles, and no one will suspect what passed in the night. The secret has already dissolved, leaving only smoke curling out of unseen vents, like a message escaping to the stars. This imagined reconstruction is not proof, of course, but it gives shape to the fragments, the euphemisms, the rumors, the echoes in art and folklore. It allows us to stand in that hush for a moment and feel the weight of secrecy, the blending of faith and fear, the belief that power could be bargained for in silence. And perhaps that's the most haunting truth of all. Not whether human lives were taken, not whether the rites worked, but the fact that emperors themselves believed in them. For a man who commanded armies and issued laws, to sit trembling before an unseen altar is to admit that some forces remained beyond control. So, as we leave that chamber behind, ask yourself, how many times did such nights unfold, unseen, unrecorded, and unresolved? And how much of history's greatest decisions were shaped not in open court, but in shadows, by whispers rising with incense smoke? And now, as the last traces of incense fade, let's allow the story to settle gently, like embers cooling after a long night. You've walked with me through hidden chambers, past locked doors, into a world where even emperors sought secret bargains with the cosmos. But here, in this quiet moment, there is no need to hold on to the weight of ritual or the chill of secrecy. Instead, let the echoes soften, as though the palace itself has gone to sleep. Imagine the lanterns being extinguished one by one, until only the faintest glow remains. The courtyards are empty, the chambers silent, and the vast palace lies under a blanket of night. Whatever happened there, whether whispered prayers, burned figurines, or uneasy silence, it all drifts away now, becoming no heavier than a dream. You don't need to carry the questions, only the calm of knowing that history holds more mysteries than we will ever solve. Your breath can fall into rhythm, slow and steady, like footsteps fading down a corridor. The air grows cooler, softer, and your body can sink a little deeper, as though finding its own hidden chamber, where rest is the only ceremony that matters. The emperors of old may have searched endlessly for control, but you, right here, can simply let go. So close your eyes if you haven't already, let the stillness surround you, and trust that the world will keep turning while you rest. The secrets of the palace can stay where they belong in history's shadows while you drift into your own peaceful night. Sweet dreams, and thank you for walking quietly with me through this journey.